Drew, thank you for joining us. I'm going to pull up a chair so you don't shrink into the back there, and I think that's a clean bottle of water. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I've told these people if they stick around, they'll get a cocktail. So I'm afraid, if you're getting dull, then it's going to be.
All right.
So thank you for joining us. And so we ought to start with a bit of due diligence here.
Okay.
And kick the tires a bit. So you've just done a round of financing.
We did.
How much?
$250 million.
What valuation?
Reportedly a $4 billion valuation.
And you're not disputing the reports?
No. We're not disputing it, no.
That's good. What sort of revenues are you doing? Can you talk about revenues?
That we don't talk about.
How many users do you have now, active users?
We have more than 50 million registered users, and we don't break it out beyond that.
So there's a registered, not actives?
Those are registered users, that's right.
And are you profitable?
We are.
On what basis? On a GAAP basis? On a cash flow basis?
On both.
So we can call it profitable.
Yes.
We all got nervous
honest to God, profitable.
We got nervous using that word after Groupon told us they were profitable.
Yeah,
and then we got to see the S1, right?
So we innovate in many ways, but not that one.
Good. So, but you can understand that we're a little cautious about the use of that word. Good.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
So now, Jerry Yang. I've got Jerry Yang on the brain. Jeff Yang from Redpoint was around earlier on today, and one of the points he made was, there's a danger in companies raising too much money. He likes his startups to stay lean and mean. And if you've got a lot of money, there's a danger that you're not going to take the tough decisions and the tough choices. Why do you need $250 million?
Well, I think it's an interesting point. I mean, interesting in our case in that we actually didn't need the money, right? Where we've been profitable. Even investments like servers or different things, we were able to do out of our existing cash flow. So from our standpoint, it's really what we're looking at is flexibility and the opportunity to move quickly on different opportunities. So things like acquisitions and some other more strategic things we have in mind over a longer period of time. We figure that, and it was also an opportunity to get some really great new investors around the table and new networks and people who have already been very helpful. So you did a $6 million A round, is that right?
We
did a $6 million A round about 3 years ago.
And so that was all you took, $6 million, and then you went straight from there to a 250 B round.
It was a 1.2 million seed then in 2007, 6 million Series A in 2008. And then $250 million. So we have to put like 257.2 in the boilerplate on the website.
So you funded that massive expansion internally off your own cash flow.
Right.
And so this is now. So now when you talk about how you might use that money, what part did deals play? You're talking about M&A here, and what kind of things might you be interested in?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now we're looking at things like just groups of talented engineers and designers and product people. Mm-hmm. Down the road we might look at other kinds of things. Some of the things we've done are partnerships with companies like HTC and other mobile folks and carriers to really get, have Dropbox improve all these other things that you use.
So do you actually have to buy groups of engineers now? Do you buy a team, or are you talking about one-off bonuses for individuals?
Well, it's really, it depends. It's kind of case dependent, depending on how mature the product is with the company and everything. Obviously, we have our own recruiting function, and that's how we get the bulk of our people. But I think a lot of the companies in sort of this generation have sort of complemented that by buying teams of talented people.
Is that something you've done?
We haven't done that yet.
But it's something you said.
It's something we're looking into.
No. So does that mean that hiring is high up on your list of issues?
Absolutely. It always will be.
Well, tell us about the implications of having a high valuation like that in terms of running a company. It does tend to turn people's heads both outside and inside a company. So how do you manage that internally when people know that their restricted stock awards are now worth whatever?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple components to that. So one is just cultural. And I think as a company, we mentioned the financing at an all hands and, a couple months ago and haven't really talked about it since. And it's
a couple of champagne bottles?
There were a couple of champagne bottles. But we mentioned it, we celebrated, move on. And I think we talk a lot more about, okay, how do we make our users happy? What are the things we want to build? Who are the people, the talented people we want to bring into the company? And so I think that's, you just make sure everybody's kind of has their eyes on the right things and you don't get too carried away with what you read in the press. And as far as the mechanics of financing itself, you look at getting a valuation that makes sense and don't get too ahead of yourself. And then 3, I think another thing you're alluding to is just sort of compensation for people. Yeah, we've had to move from stock options to restricted stock. And that's pretty well-traveled territory by companies like Facebook and Twitter who have had to do the same thing.
Does it make recruiting harder? I mean, when people can see that there's already a lot of value in the stock, does it mean that people looking for that next big lottery win are going to go and look somewhere else? And similarly, does it mean it's harder to retain because, particularly with secondary markets now, people who've had vested options can simply cash out and walk away?
Actually, I think if anything, it's made some things easier in that. All along we've talked to candidates, and when we have a conversation with a candidate, we're like, look, we're going after this, untold number of billions of dollars market, right? And sure, it's great that we have 50 million users, but that's only a couple % of the people that we eventually want to reach. And so, it's easy to kind of look at Dropbox and just say, oh wow, be really excited about where we are, but I mean, for us, this is like chapter 1. And so, if anything, it's one, just validation that we're on, that we're on that kind of trajectory, and 2, that it's a really awesome time for people to join. Actually, where how many people get to be among the first? We're under 100 people, and
still under 100 people.
Yeah, and so how many opportunities do you get to be, among the first 100 people at a company that's on a ramp like this?
How quickly are you going to ramp up hiring now? So next year, for instance, how many people do you think you're going to hire?
So we'll get to a couple hundred, 200-300. We're still in kind of the planning phases for that. But if you look at other companies that had this kind of trajectory, they quickly go from 100 to 300 to whatever, but it quickly ramps into the thousands.
So you're looking at thousands within a 2 to 3 year time frame?
Maybe not 2 to 3 years, but I mean, certainly, we're doing something that requires a lot of engineering. So
how big is this market opportunity when you say?
Well, I think it's, we don't put a ton of time into figuring out, okay, what's the kind of total addressable market or reports from different analysts or things like that. I think we think about it pretty simply, which is, Dropbox is something that anyone with a computer or a phone could use. And there's a lot of people out there, and very few people actually have Dropbox today. And so, and then the same thing is true in the business, right? We're seeing, well, we can talk more about that, but we're seeing all kinds of companies using Dropbox, either sort of company-wide or just pockets of people trying to get something done. And again, when you think about the number of groups of people that need to get something done, there's a lot of them. And we've only reached a small fraction of them.
So you're thinking really big. I mean, you're thinking your company could be worth
hundreds of billions is I mean that's what we strive for.
Now, I have to tell you that everybody who sits on this stage says they're building a business for the long term, but sometimes they don't. And I remember talking to Chad Hurley a month before he sold YouTube to Google, and Chad insisted he was building a business for the long term. How do we know you're building a business for the long term? What are the signs here that?
Well, I think if you are, one thing is just logistically, if you raise money at that kind of valuation, that limits your options as far as acquisition. And I think it just goes back to what the founders and team are excited about, which is, the most personally exciting thing for me is walking around in a Dropbox hoodie and having people know what that is, or sort of looking over someone's shoulder in a Starbucks and seeing a little blue icon. And beyond a certain point, you sort of run out of things you want to buy and you don't have because you don't have enough money. And that's for me, one of the interesting things coming out to the Valley is that, the people with the most money are not necessarily the happiest. So anyway,
well, we ought to pause on that one. So you came from MIT, 3 years ago?
About 4 years ago.
4 years ago?
Yeah. And
and
so,
you noticed that there were some people who are motivated by money, and then there are others who are motivated by building businesses.
yeah, I think, well, once you kind of have, once you're at that stage where, you run out of things to buy, which happens pretty quickly. And if you look at some of these other people who have built these companies, they, still live like 19-year-olds or like have very modest, they don't buy a lot of stuff. Yeah, I think what gets them up in the morning is the opportunity to build something great, and reach a lot of people.
You've obviously had offers. You must get them all the time. You had an offer from Steve Jobs at one point?
We never let it get to kind of the numbers or specific proposal stage. People speculated about it, but there was never, if you don't want to sell your company, don't get into a conversation about,
right.
how much you would be willing to
So you put
sell
up
for.
the body language says that up front we aren't for sale.
Yeah, we said that. We've said that throughout. And yeah, we haven't had those kinds of conversations in a long time.
Yeah. One consequence is you're now competing with Apple and with many other companies that see cloud storage as a market that should rightly be theirs, at least for their existing customers. In fact, how do you define your service? Should we think of it as cloud storage? Because that's what most people think.
I think, people could put all kinds of labels on it. We don't talk about it. We don't use phrases like the cloud or online storage or different things. In a literal sense, that's what it is. But, the way we think about it is really, it's this opportunity to connect and sort of be a fabric that connects all of your devices and services and apps. It's helping people deal with this new problem that they have, where suddenly it's not just, a laptop as your connected device, but now you're taking pictures with your phone, and you've got an iPad, and soon that'll be your TV and your car and your camera, and all these things will be connected. A lot of these things will be made by different companies, and so there's a real need to help these things talk to each other, because in fact a lot of the vendors are incented to not make their stuff work well with others.
So when you look at that and you compare it with Apple and Google, who are now have things out in the market this year that compete, they obviously work in their own ecosystems, particularly Apple. And those ecosystems are becoming quite strong. So how do you compete with an Apple proposition where you buy the hardware and it all works? It all just fits together. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to download any apps. You don't need to go anywhere. It's getting tough.
Yeah, I think the situation is different with each of these larger companies, but what people really love about Dropbox are a couple of things. One is you can have all your important stuff in one place, and it's just taken care of for you. And the second is that you're free to use whatever you want to use. So it will give you a great experience on your iPad, but if you have, right now with the Apple stuff, if you have a, Droid, like, you're out of luck. And even with sort of iCloud within the Apple universe, like today, when you take that description of Dropbox helps you have all your stuff in one place and get to it from anywhere, that doesn't really describe what iCloud does today. And look, we've known since the beginning that we're building something that is important that a lot of the larger companies are also going to want to build. And so for us, the really important thing is reaching a lot of people fast and building things that are good.
How much are you dependent on open platforms? So for instance, in mobile, you have a deal with HTC you talked about. HTC is under legal attack from Apple, that it's seeking an injunction to stop them shipping smartphones into the US right now. Now that's, one example, but it's a fairly dramatic example of how your distribution, your access to your customers could be blocked by the platform wars that are being fought out, between some of these big companies. How do you position yourself for that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. So one is, we've never had, for example, had access to the literal file system on your phone. So under the hood, you have sort of a file system on the phone that's kind of like the one you have on your computer. And Apple doesn't give you access to that from a programmatic standpoint. And so what we've done is we've give app developers, so if you're making something common like a photo sharing app or a document viewing or editing app, all the way to more obscure things like medical dictation apps, we give developers little pieces of code so that instead of saving the data onto the phone itself, it saves it into Dropbox. Or instead of needing to send things or upload things into the app, you can just connect it to your Dropbox. And so ripping that functionality out of out of these apps is, one, technically pretty complicated, and more importantly, it would just make millions and millions of people unhappy because they use Dropbox either on their phone or as part of these different apps that they have. And to suddenly take that away, it's not really like Flash. There's a notable example of Apple removing Flash from all their devices. And I think it's a little bit different here in that the moral high ground that came from, they had trouble making a technical solution that actually worked. And so there are legitimate kind of user experience and battery life and so on concerns. And I don't think, ripping Dropbox out of, off of the platform, I think would make a lot more people unhappy, because it really would interrupt with, their
Has that ever been
ordinary life.
threatened? Do you think do you consider it to be a possible threat to you? It sounds unlikely, but
Yeah, we think it's pretty unlikely. Because we talk to these companies, even at Apple, you talk to someone on their developer relations team, and they're like, yeah, we love Dropbox, we use it all the time, and even with something like iCloud, they're going to have deeply integrated functionality that pertains to a subset of the stuff on the phone, but when you need to sort of span everything, that's where Dropbox is really useful.
yeah. So distribution with apps is a key part of it, and then you've also got distribution with hardware.
Yeah, and I think just organically,
So
we have
you've got
millions of people who
routes to market.
millions of people who just put Dropbox on their phone or on their iPad or different things.
Yeah. So when you talk about it as the storage utility around applications or whatever, should we think about you as a utility? Do you think about yourselves as a utility, or are you evolving into something else?
Well, I think we certainly think of ourselves as a platform, and that's a word that gets abused pretty badly. But we think we're building something really fundamental, where people may know us today as okay, there's this magic folder and there's this app you put on your computer or your phone. But we really see ourselves as really building the internet file system. And the Dropbox app as it exists today, we think has potential to be the first kind of killer app for this platform where we're building, where instead of needing to send things around or keep track of all these moving parts yourself, you can just plug these apps and new devices and different things into Dropbox. And for the same reason that people put little Facebook buttons everywhere, because you've already established your friends and your social graph, and you'd much rather just plug the app into that. Our goal is to have little Dropbox buttons everywhere. Whether that's in a physical store like a Best Buy, or as you're just kind of doing your thing on the web or downloading apps onto your phone. And what that means is then all these apps suddenly just work and have access to all your stuff. And you don't have these little pockets and silos of data that you have to manage, which is just a really frustrating experience.
So what are the other parts of that platform as you look at it? Dropbox, if what you have is one little piece at the moment?
Well, I think it's really the way we think about it is any device or service or app that creates or consumes data, right? And so it's anything from your phone to having a Dropbox button on your remote for your TV, right? For the first time, you could get to your stuff, or play your music in your living room, or see vacation photos, because people when you think about your iPhone, you're excited that and the fact that it can take HD video. Well, that's great, but then how many people have actually played that in their seen their videos in their living room? Not too many. And so there's all these little things that seem like they'll obviously be possible in the future, but they aren't. They're out of reach today because there's this missing piece in the middle that we do. And so that enabling those kinds of things that seem like they should be possible but are out of reach, I think we have a lot to contribute to making these other things better.
A lot of information in Dropbox is shared between people.
Right.
Are you, so you're a collaboration tool to some degree. We'll talk about sort of enterprise uses in the middle in a moment, but how does that play with social? Is this the foundation of a social experience, or do you simply act as the back end to other people's social experiences?
Well, I think, it'll be a little bit of both, right? The same way that you take Facebook, right? You have Facebook.com, and they provide these kind of base experiences around keeping up with your friends and sharing photos and things like that. And then you have all these other apps that, from photo sharing apps to other social experiences that kind of plug into Facebook. And I think it's going to be the same thing with Dropbox, where we will give you, basic, simple tools to do everyday things like, collaborate on projects and view and edit documents, or, share photos, things like that. People are already doing these things today with Dropbox. And then we have a ton of interest from developers who might have a more specific kind of, photo sharing experience in mind. And
so we should think about it as a disaggregated Facebook in some ways. You're a core utility that drives a lot of other applications.
Well, I mean, I think they're different purposes, right?
Yeah.
I think Facebook is really about kind of the social graph and the social interaction around things, and Dropbox is really around keeping track of your stuff and making it available. And so, if we would use the Facebook social graph if we were to, do more around sharing. And the way we think about it is we just want to take the everyday things that you do and make them easier.
You, at a pretty early stage in your existence, and you're already targeting the enterprise market, which is, they have different demands there, and they want custom support. You set up customer support, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a whole different proposition. How do you think about that market? When you're growing so fast on consumer, stick to that.
Well, we struggled with that a lot because in the early days, because we'd go in an investment pitch or whatever, and so the people on the other side of the table would be like, well, you guys a consumer company or an enterprise company? And we're like, well, and I think there's this really interesting thing happening where, take something like your iPad or your phone, you're going to use it at home and you're going to use it at work, and we're seeing that with Dropbox today. It's kind of like Skype or even things like Windows or Office, where you use the same product in sort of a personal context and in a work context. And what happens, one of the amazing things about our business model is we reach all of these consumers or individuals through viral, through viral elements of sharing and things like that, and word of mouth. And then, for many hours a day, a lot of those people are working, and they bring Dropbox in the office, and maybe they start just kind of sharing stuff between their home computer and their work computer, but very often that turns into, hey, I'm going to work on this project with these 5 people, and then that becomes a department. When in many cases it becomes the entire company. It sort of adopts Dropbox as the way they collaborate.
How do the IT departments feel about this? Do they welcome you with open arms?
I think it really depends on the company and sort of the size of the company. When we sort of go after the enterprise or so-called enterprise, we're not looking today for a 10,000 seat deal with a Cisco or whatever. It's really, one thing that people forget is that you take a 50,000 person company, and that 50,000 person company is composed of all these thousands of little pockets and handfuls of people just trying to get something done. And that's where Dropbox gets adopted.
But that's what scares the IT guys, right? That someone somewhere in some corner is putting some extremely sensitive information out in the cloud they don't know about.
I don't think it's really a conversation just about Dropbox, right? Because people are also using their iPads. They're also, the alternatives are, in many cases are even worse, right? Where, okay, if Dropbox
That's
is locked.
That's not a great sales proposition to an IT department.
No, I'm just sort of talking about the broader. Yeah. But I'm just saying that the sort of broader what's happening in IT, which is, okay, so you block Dropbox, but then people are going to be putting these things on thumb drives and all this other stuff.
What happened in February? You had a security breach in February, right? Where
it was in June.
In June?
Yeah.
Where, what happened?
Yeah, we had a code update that had a bug and it affected our whole authentication system. So there was a window of time on a Sunday where the passwords weren't getting checked properly. Mm-hmm. And so obviously not the kind of thing you want to have happen. What
have you learned from that, or what have you done about it to stop it happening again?
Yeah, so there's a long list of things we've done, from sort of the automated things we had in place to check the code, like obviously didn't catch it. So in addition to bolstering those things, there's a long list of things we did on the security front. But more importantly, I think it was really just kind of a reminder for us is that it's easy to kind of, especially as the company's growing quickly, focus on we want to build these new features or this new functionality, and that even beyond just security, right? It's reliability, never losing data. There's all these things that are foundational that you need to put people that need to always be top of mind, even if they aren't something that's going to get written, get a bunch of coverage for a new launch.
Yeah. Let's open this up for questions. We've got some microphones. While we wait for the first one over here, I haven't asked you the IPO question yet. How could that slip my mind? I mean, just going back to seriously though, to what you were talking about earlier, that you could deal with this valuation in all hands meeting. Now let's just get on and do our job. The fact that you don't have a public stock trading out there must be a great relief to you right now when you look at what's happening at Groupon and what Zynga's going through. Yeah.
I think we look at all that category companies, pre-IPO companies, and we have an opportunity to prevent some of those things from happening, or at least learn from their experiences.
Yeah. But an IPO is in your future, presumably.
I mean, we don't have. We just raised $250 million. We don't really have a need for capital right now.
Right. But are you planning an IPO next year?
We don't have specific plans.
Right. No. Let's take one there.
It's Avery Lightford here. Quick question. Dropbox is very good for an individual to share their files between all their individual devices. But when you start to work with a group, there gets to be a question of security. But that then complicates your ease of use. So what are your thoughts about how that balance between security and ease of use and trying to deal with things like LDAP and all the security integration of the enterprise?
Yeah, so I think, one is just foundationally designing the product such that, all the data is sent over secure channels, that, you follow all the best practices, and as your sort of target company gets bigger and bigger, then they might, that checklist of things that they need, of other requirements beyond sort of the basics gets bigger. So, we really focus on getting a lot of, up to say a couple hundred user companies or departments to use Dropbox. And, if you're a bank, or if you have certain requirements like, hey, we can only have the data stored in the EU, then, Dropbox that might not be a fit. And so I think part of this is we'll absolutely get to those concerns over time, but I think we really want to focus on building a really great experience for just groups of people and companies where Dropbox is a perfect fit. And you ask how the IT person feels about it, and often we have IT people buying Dropbox all the time, and and often they had been longtime users of the product. And so, I think it's really, and if you sort of put security in a broader context, how are people losing their data? It's because, the external hard drive in your closet doesn't spit up anymore, or you leave your laptop on a plane, or you leave your phone in a cab, and it's not because your Gmail is getting hacked. And so all of the requirements from a security standpoint are totally legitimate, and as the enterprise gets bigger and bigger, they have more kind of regulations and things with which they need to be compliant. But we find for a lot of people, it's important to put it into context.
One in the far corner.
Hi, Creighton Reed from W.R. Hambrecht. Drew, I was just wondering, with such a fast-growing company, how do you make strategic decisions, and to whom do you turn for advice or as a sounding board?
Yeah, so, I think we have kind of one guiding principle as far as how, what is our overarching goal, and that's really just maximize the number of happy Dropbox users. And it's interesting because that's a goal that applies to not just engineering and product, but also our business development, finance. And there's a couple other really important goals, but from there you can sort of break that out. Okay, well, part of that is finding a lot of people and getting a lot of people to use the product, and part of that is making those users really happy. And then from there, happiness means adding this functionality or these different things. So we have this kind of telescoping thing where we have a bunch of goals that cascade up and serve and contribute to this goal of making our users happy. And as far as who I turn to for advice, I mean, there's other entrepreneurs, our board. I mean, I'm a big fan of learning from, all kinds of different historical examples and books, and, Andy Grove has a bunch of great books. I mean, I could give a list of things that have.
Do you have
really
any personal mentors or coaches? Do you have a coach?
Yeah, so I don't have a coach, kind of in the conventional sense, but I'm friends with a bunch of entrepreneurs who either are going through the same thing or have gone through it in the past. We've got really great early investors and advisors. So Hadi Partovi, he started a bunch of companies. He's built big organizations, and he advises us. He spends time at the company, and there's a lot of people like that have been really helpful along the way.
There's one over there.
Hi, Drew. I'm Carl Jones with Inhite. I want to say great meeting you at the startup school. Congratulations to your success. It sounds to me that the $250 million raise is more on the technology side versus the strategic growth of the company, because it sounds like you want to make your technology more robust in terms of automation. I guess the usage of fund of the 250.
I mean, I think I do think it's more strategic and just for flexibility, and we also just don't talk too much about specific things we want to do with it. But I think there's a big advantage in just, if you look at the balance sheets of other folks that care about the space, there's a big differential there. So, even though we don't need the money for operations, we think that in the future, both that flexibility is helpful, and two, again, the opportunity to bring other great folks around the table. And Index has more of an international footprint, and you could say different things about all of our investors.
All right, let's squeeze in a couple more. One here.
Could you talk about your revenue model and what kind of, how are you planning to monetize this apart from just a storage fee or access fee? What are the different lines of revenue that you're looking at?
Yeah, so on the consumer side, it's really, so we have this freemium model, and we're fortunate in that it worked really well since the beginning. And from that, you get all the great things about, from the kind of classic consumer internet companies that have grown really quickly, right? So no advertising, growth is all viral and word of mouth. It's very predictable. You get to big numbers really quickly. And then the challenge with that is how getting, usually you're squeezing pennies or dimes or, out of your users, through advertising and different things. And we also have this other business, which is Dropbox for Teams, which is sort of what people call the enterprise side or the product for business, where it has all the great things you love about a SaaS business, so the sort of recurring revenue and high renewal rates and stickiness and different things. Except most SaaS companies spend 40% of their revenue on sales and marketing. We don't have that, and so it's this really wild leverage on both sides, or we sort of take the best of both worlds, which I think is really unusual and exciting.
All right, we'll take one last question over there.
I'm interested to hear at the beginning that you have about under 100 employees and are only looking to hire 100 or 200 more. I'm curious as to what activities you see as core to the company that are done in-house, and how much you currently and plan to in the future utilize outsourcing and outside workforces to do some of the tasks the company needs to do to grow.
Yeah. Well, from an R&D standpoint or product development standpoint, we want to have everybody in one, as many people in one place as possible, just because I think it, there's a lot of benefit to that. And the other thing, there are certainly things we outsource. I mean, one example is Amazon. We're a big customer of Amazon Web Services, probably one of their larger ones from a storage standpoint. And I think one of the great things is we have flexibility there, right? So Amazon does a great job, and we're super happy with them. And we have the flexibility of using Amazon or doing our own infrastructure, different things, and those are things we look at too.
All right, on that point, if you want to grab Drew afterwards, please do, and I'm going to let you go.
All right, great.
Drew, thanks very much indeed. Drew Houston.